Have you ever wondered how a simple act of kindness could completely change your life? In today's story, a struggling single dad does something most people wouldn't think twice about. He helps a homeless woman stranded in a snowstorm. What he doesn't realize? She's actually a billionaire in disguise. And when she returns, it's not with riches, but with a proposal that will change everything. This is a story about second chances, unexpected love, and how the smallest moments of goodness can lead to life's biggest miracles. If you believe the world needs more kindness, more hope, and more stories like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. That way, you'll never miss one of these heartfelt journeys. Now, sit back, relax, and let's dive into Struggling Single Dad Helps Homeless Woman. Unaware, she's a billionaire who returns to propose. The sky hung low over the mountains, thick with brooding clouds, as the last sliver of daylight slipped beneath the horizon. Snowflakes had started their slow descent by the time Eli Mercer guided his rusty pickup truck down the winding road, tires crunching over fresh powder. Inside the cab, the heater hummed weakly, a thin stream of warm air fighting the creeping cold. Beside him, Jack sat bundled in his oversized jacket, nose nearly pressed against the foggy window. "Dad," he murmured, eyes following the swirl of snowflakes outside. "Do you think the storm's gonna be bad?" Eli kept his eyes on the road but reached over, giving his son's gloved hand a reassuring squeeze. "We'll be home before it really hits," he promised, though the way the wind howled through the trees made him tighten his grip on the steering wheel. Home wasn't much, just a weathered cabin tucked deep in the woods, built by his grandfather, and barely kept standing by Eli's calloused hands. But it was safe, it was familiar, and after 3 years of raising Jack alone, it was their sanctuary. As they rounded a bend near the old logging road, something caught Eli's eye. A dark figure crouched beneath the overhang of an abandoned shed, barely visible against the snow. He slowed instinctively, heart thudding. "Stay in the truck," he told Jack, voice low but steady, and pulled to the side of the road. Stepping out into the biting wind, Eli squinted toward the figure. It was a woman, thin, shivering, wrapped in what looked like layers of old clothes. She kept her head down, as if hoping the snow itself would make her invisible. "Ma'am," he called, careful not to startle her. "Are you all right?" She looked up, and for a split second their eyes met, startlingly clear gray against the stormy backdrop, shadowed by exhaustion. She opened her mouth, then seemed to think better of it, shaking her head. Eli hesitated. Logic told him to move on. He had his son to think of, supplies running low, a storm barreling down. But something about the hollow look in her eyes gnawed at him. "Look," he said, softening his tone. "The storm's coming in fast. You won't last out here. Come with me. Our cabin's not far." For a heartbeat, she didn't move. Then, as if the weight of the cold was finally too much, she nodded once, stiffly. He helped her into the truck, noticing how her hands trembled despite the layers of mismatched gloves. Jack's curious eyes flicked to hers, but he didn't say a word, sensing something fragile about the woman in the back seat. The rest of the ride was silent except for the wind battering the windows. By the time they reached the cabin, night had swallowed the woods whole. Eli ushered them inside quickly, guiding the woman to the worn armchair near the fireplace. The interior smelled faintly of pine and old cedar, the logs in the hearth crackling faintly. "You'll have to excuse the place," Eli said, crouching, to stoke the fire higher. "It's not much, but it's warm." She gave a slight shake of her head, her lips pressed tight as if holding something back. Jack hovered nearby, eyes wide. "What's your name?" he asked bluntly, his usual shyness overridden by curiosity. The woman glanced at him, then at Eli, as if gauging whether to trust. Finally, her voice emerged, quiet but clear. "Clara." Eli nodded. "I'm Eli. This here's my boy, Jack." He straightened, wiping his hands on his jeans. "We don't have much, but you're welcome to stay till the storm passes." Clara murmured her thanks, gaze flickering toward the window where snow whipped past in angry gusts. Eli busied himself in the small kitchen, heating up the leftover stew from the night before. Jack settled cross-legged on the floor, sneaking glances at Clara, who sat stiffly, her fingers curled around the mug of water he'd handed her. The quiet between them wasn't uncomfortable exactly, more like the hush before something important. Eli sensed it, though he couldn't put his finger on why. There was something about Clara, something guarded yet fragile, like a porcelain figure with cracks just below the surface. After dinner, as Jack yawned and retreated to his small room, Eli paused by the fireplace, unsure how to broach the questions piling in his mind. Instead, he kept it simple. "You're welcome to stay the night," he said. "The roads won't be safe till morning." Clara looked up from the flames, her expression unreadable. "Thank you," she replied quietly. "You didn't have to stop." Eli shrugged, leaning one arm against the mantel. "Maybe not, but no one deserves to be out there alone in a storm." Their eyes met again, something unspoken lingering in the space between them. As the wind howled and snow battered the window panes, the small cabin felt, just for a moment, like the safest place in the world. The wind's mournful whistle had finally quieted by morning, though thick drifts of snow still blanketed every inch of land surrounding Eli Mercer's cabin. The world outside felt heavy and silent, as if holding its breath. Inside, the fire had burned low, casting faint shadows that danced against the wooden walls. Eli stood at the window, mug of black coffee warming his hands, eyes tracing the treetops bowed under snow's weight. It wasn't the first time he'd seen a storm like that. It came with the territory out here, but something about this one felt different. Maybe because for the first time in years, there was someone unfamiliar asleep under his roof. He turned, his gaze to the armchair by the hearth. Clara was curled beneath the worn quilt he'd offered the night before, her face relaxed in sleep, strands of dark hair falling loose across her cheek. Without the hard lines of worry shadowing her expression, she looked almost peaceful. Almost. Jack's small footsteps padded down the hallway behind him, followed by a sleepy voice. "Is she still here, Dad?" Eli gave a nod. "She's asleep. Let's let her rest a bit." Jack tiptoed over, peeking at Clara with a child's earnest curiosity. "Do you think she's got family somewhere?" The question caught Eli off guard. He glanced at his son, noticing how the boy's brows knit together slightly. An echo of how Eli's own father used to frown when something weighed on him. "I don't know," Eli admitted honestly. "Maybe she does. Maybe she doesn't." Jack mulled that over for a moment, then nodded, seemingly satisfied for now. "Can I feed the birds?" Eli gave him a small smile. "Sure. Bundle up." By the time Jack had disappeared out the door with his little tin of seed, Clara stirred. She blinked against the faint light filtering through the frosted window panes, her gaze landing first on the dying embers, then on Eli. There was a flicker of hesitation, almost as if she wasn't sure whether she should still be here. "Morning," Eli offered, voice quiet but firm. "Coffee?" She sat up, drawing the quilt tighter around her shoulders, and nodded. "Yes, please. Thank you." He poured her a mug, setting it gently on the small table near her chair. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the silence stretching not unpleasantly but cautiously, like the space between two people unfamiliar with the other's edges. Finally, Clara broke it. I should probably head out once the road's clear." Eli leaned against the counter, folding his arms. "Where to?" She paused, eyes flickering down to the steam rising from her cup. "Somewhere warmer, maybe," she murmured. "Not sure yet." It wasn't much of an answer, but Eli didn't press. He could recognize guardedness when he saw it. After all, he'd worn it himself like armor for years. "Well," he said after a beat, "roads will stay messy at least another day. You're welcome to stay until it's safe." Clara looked up then, meeting his gaze. Something unspoken flickered. Behind her eyes, a mixture of gratitude and discomfort. "Thank you," she said softly. "You and your son, you didn't have to take me in." Eli shrugged as if kindness came without second thought, though in truth, it hadn't always. It was the memory of his late wife, how she'd never turned her back on anyone, that nudged him toward decisions like this. "You looked like you needed it," he replied simply. "That's reason enough." She stared at him for a moment longer, then nodded once, clutching the mug like a lifeline. Later that afternoon, after Jack had finished his schoolwork at the small kitchen table, the boy bounded outside again, eager to tunnel through the fresh drifts. Clara sat by the window, her gaze following him silently. Eli worked quietly by the fireplace, repairing a broken hinge from one of the kitchen cabinets. Every now and then, his eyes flicked toward Clara, noting how she seemed both present and far away at once. "You're good with him," she said suddenly, her voice soft but steady. Eli paused, surprised. "Jack? He's easy to love." She smiled faintly, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "It shows." There was something fragile in the way she said it, as though she was speaking about something she'd never had, or had lost long ago. Eli sensed a question lingering just beneath the surface, one she wasn't quite ready to voice. Instead, he shifted the conversation. "What about you?" he asked carefully. "You got anyone waiting on you somewhere?" Clara's eyes darted back to the snow outside. "Not anymore," she murmured, then added quickly, "It's complicated." Eli nodded, not pushing further. Life was full of complicated things. "Well," he said, returning his focus to the hinge, "sometimes people show up right where they're needed, even if they don't know it yet." Out of the corner of his eye, he caught her glancing at him again, studying, maybe wondering just what kind of man would take a stranger in without question. The fire crackled, warm and steady, and in the quiet between words, something shifted. Small, almost imperceptible, but real. That night, after Jack had gone to bed, Clara stood at the doorway, looking out into the vast, silent white stretching beyond the porch. You approached quietly. "Beautiful, isn't it?" She nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "It feels still, like the world's paused." He glanced at her profile, shadows dancing gently across her face. "Sometimes a pause is exactly what we need." She turned to him, her expression softer, though her eyes still held something unreadable. "You're a good man, Eli Mercer." He gave her a small, almost self-deprecating smile. "Just trying to do right by my boy." But as they stood side by side, in the hush of the falling snow, Eli felt it, a strange sense that their paths crossing wasn't mere coincidence. He just didn't know yet how deeply that truth would run. The storm had passed, but the silence it left behind lingered like a memory no one quite knew how to talk about. Morning light poured in soft through the frost-laced windows of the cabin, casting pale gold across the rough wooden floorboards. Outside, the world was painted white and hushed, save for the occasional call of a crow or the crackle of snow falling from a heavy branch. Eli Mercer stood by the kitchen sink, scrubbing his calloused hands clean after stacking wood outside. The faint clatter of Jack's voice carried from the back room as the boy busied himself with his books. Across the room, Clara sat quietly at the small table, steam curling from the mug of coffee between her hands. She hadn't said much all. Morning. Not that Eli minded. He understood the language of silence better than most. But there was something in the way she stared out the window, her eyes distant, as if the view outside reminded her of something far away. "You warm enough?" he asked, breaking the quiet. She blinked, startled slightly, then offered a small nod. "Yes, thank you. The cabin, it's cozy." He gave a half smile, drying his hands on a towel. "It's old, drafty in spots, but she holds steady through the worst of it." Clara glanced down at the rim of her mug, fingers tracing the edge absently. "I like it. she murmured. Feels like it's got history. Eli's gaze softened. It does. My grandfather built it. My dad kept it up. Guess it's my turn now. She looked up at him, something flickering in her expression. You've lived here all your life? He nodded. Went off for a few years, tried life somewhere else. But after my wife passed, well, this was the only place that felt like home. Her eyes lingered on his face, searching. I'm sorry, she said, quietly. About your wife? Eli gave a faint nod, the familiar weight settling over him like an old coat. It's been 3 years now. Feels longer some days, feels shorter others. There was no need to explain more. Grief had its own language, and Clara seemed fluent in it, though she said nothing further. Instead, she looked past him, eyes drawn to the mantel above the fireplace. A small photo frame sat there, slightly askew. It was an old picture. Eli and a young woman, her laugh frozen in midair, with Jack still a toddler grinning between them. Clara rose slowly, moving closer to the hearth. She reached out, almost hesitating before picking up the frame. Was beautiful, she said softly. Eli swallowed. Her name was Margaret. He watched as Clara's thumb brushed over the glass, her face unreadable. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the crackle of the fire. Then, almost cautiously, Clara spoke. Do you ever wonder if you're supposed to start over, or if some people just aren't meant to? Her voice held something fragile beneath the surface, like a window frosted over, hiding what lay behind. Eli studied her for a beat, sensing more beneath her question than she was letting on. I used to think starting over wasn't for me, he admitted. But Jack, he's got a way of reminding me the world doesn't stop just because you want it to. He paused, then added, sometimes, I think it's not about starting fresh. It's about finding the pieces worth keeping. Clara's eyes flickered as if his words had struck something tender. She set the frame back carefully, taking a slow breath. Before she could speak, Jack came bounding into the room, breaking the heaviness like sunlight through a crack. Dad! He exclaimed, holding up a small wooden birdhouse he'd been working on. I finished it, Eli smiled, grateful for the shift. That's looking real good, buddy. Jack turned excitedly to Clara. Want to help me paint it? Clara hesitated at first, but then something softened in her face. Sure, she said, offering the boy a smile. Later that afternoon, the three of them sat at the kitchen table, brushes in hand, as Jack chattered about which colors the birds might like best. Eli found himself watching Clara when she wasn't, looking, how she seemed more at ease when focused on small tasks, how her smile came easier around Jack. But every now and then, when she thought no one noticed, her gaze would drift back to the photograph on the mantel, a shadow crossing her features. When Jack finally scampered off to put the birdhouse outside, Eli leaned back, wiping his hands clean. You're good with him, he remarked, echoing her words from the day before. Clara glanced at him, something like surprise flashing in her eyes. He's a sweet kid, Eli nodded. Takes after his mother. She smiled faintly but didn't speak. Then, after a long pause, Clara glanced down at her hands. Can I ask you something? Sure. Her fingers tightened around the paintbrush. How did you do it? After she was gone? Eli stilled, the question catching him off guard. I didn't, he admitted after a moment. Not right away. I got up, I worked, took care of Jack, but it felt like walking around without a heart. He met her gaze squarely. But little by little, you find it again. Maybe not the same. Maybe not all at once, but enough to keep going. Clara swallowed hard, her eyes shimmering just slightly. That's brave, she whispered. Eli shook his head gently. It's life. You get through it, or it gets through you. For a beat, they sat in quiet understanding. Two people carrying pasts heavy enough to bend them, but not break them. And somewhere deep in that stillness, something unspoken settled between them, fragile and real. By mid-morning, the sun had finally pushed its way through the heavy clouds, glinting off the snow-laden branches like 1,000 tiny diamonds. It was the kind of crisp, clear winter day where the air felt sharp and clean, the kind Eli Mercer usually welcomed. But today, it brought an unwelcome surprise. Eli stood on the back porch, surveying the splintered mess that used to be part of his fence. A section, maybe 20 feet, had collapsed under the weight of the snow. One of the old posts cracked clean through. He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. The fence wasn't fancy, just enough to mark the property line, to keep wandering deer out of the small vegetable patch he and Jack worked every spring. But it still needed fixing, and fast. More snow was bound to come, and the last thing he wanted was for the damage to spread. Behind him, Clara stepped out quietly, pulling her borrowed coat tight against the chill. She followed his gaze to the broken fence, brow creasing. "Looks like it took quite a hit." "Yeah," Eli muttered. "It's old, like everything else around here." He didn't mean it bitterly, but the weight in his voice lingered longer than he intended. He glanced at Clara, expecting her to retreat back inside, but she didn't move. Instead, she asked, "Do you have any spare posts?" He shot her a sidelong look, unsure if she was joking. "I've got a few. Gonna take some muscle, though." Her mouth curved just faintly. "I can handle a hammer." Eli blinked, caught off guard by the quiet confidence behind her words. He opened his mouth to suggest she didn't have to, but thought better of it. Truth be told, he could use the extra pair of hands. "All right then," he said, motioning toward the tool shed. "Let's get to it." They worked in companionable silence, bundled against the cold, breath puffing out invisible clouds. Clara surprised him. She wasn't afraid to get her hands dirty, steady and focused as she helped lift new posts into place and held boards steady while Eli hammered them down. She didn't complain about the chill or the rough work. In fact, there was something almost purposeful about the way she threw herself into the task. Every now and then, Eli caught himself glancing at her, wondering, not for the first time, who she really was beneath the layers she kept so carefully guarded. Jack bounded outside midway through, his cheeks flushed red from the cold. He watched them work for a moment, then eagerly jumped in, helping hold the toolbox, handing Eli nails, darting around like a small, energetic shadow. By the time they finished, the sun hung low, casting long amber beams across the snow. The fence stood straight once more, patched and sturdy. Eli stepped back, wiping sweat from his brow despite the chill. "Well," he said, glancing at Clara, "not bad for a day's work." She smiled, this time a genuine, easy thing that reached her eyes. "I have to say, I didn't expect to be building fences when I ended up here." He chuckled softly. "Life's funny that way." Jack grinned, clearly proud of himself. "We're a pretty good team, huh?" Eli looked at his son, then at Clara, something warm settling low in his chest. "Yeah, buddy, we are." That evening, after dinner, the three of them lingered at the kitchen table longer than usual. Jack, still riding high from their teamwork, chattered excitedly about how they should build a treehouse next come spring. Clara listened patiently, her smile soft. She seemed lighter tonight, Eli noticed, less like a woman weighed down by whatever shadow she carried. After Jack had finally been coaxed to bed, Eli sat by the fireplace, oiling one of his old hunting knives. Clara drifted to the window, looking out into the night where moonlight glinted off the snow. He watched her for a moment, then said quietly, "You didn't have to help today. I know it wasn't easy work." She turned, eyes catching his. "I wanted to." Something lingered between them, unspoken but growing. Eli leaned back, studying her in the firelight. "You're not used to sitting still, are you?" Her lips twitched, faintly. "Not much." Another pause, then he asked, careful, "You said yesterday, it's complicated. That where you came from." She stiffened.